Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
Welcome to Quilts from the Underground Railroad. I'm Eleanor Burns. Well, today we're going to jump aboard the Freedom Train for a historical look at quilts from the 1860s and the significant part they played in helping slaves communicate undercover. Well, I'll conduct as we gather our monkey wrench, and we'll hop onto the wagon wheel. We'll follow the Bear's Paw Trail through the mountains, and we'll meet safely at the crossroads. Well, it's an adventure you won't want to miss.
Coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
The Underground Railroad really wasn't a train at all. The Underground Railroad refers to the 19th century movement that transported thousands of slaves to freedom. A network of participants called conductors, who were both black and white, shepherded the slaves called passengers north of Canada. Now, they harbored them in stations or safe houses along the way. Now, their safe place may have been a church or a stately home or even a log cabin. But our story is just getting way ahead of us. Let's follow a slave woman living in a small shack on a plantation in the South. It's the 1830s. Now, she would be up at 6 a.m. working in the field all day long, and then she would come home and work all night at quilting. Oh, they'd have the best quilting bees. They would rather quilt than sleep. And if the moon and the stars weren't out, they would hold the light for each other. The missus of the plantation may have given the scraps for this quilt. Well, my favorite piece of fabric is the vibrant blue and the border. Oh, I just love it. And then there's plenty of indigo blue, there's double pinks, there's yellows, browns. Now, their quilt patterns had stories and meanings behind them. For instance, there's no straight lines in this quilt. They believed it's bad luck to make straight lines or to make a perfect quilt. That's not hard, because evil spirits follow straight lines. An imperfect quilt will distract the devil in the night. Now, if something bad happened on the plantation, they would hang a quilt as this with all the triangles. Now, the triangles offer prayer in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Oh, the orange triangles are wonderful. And then there's also triangles of shirting, there's stripes, there's checks, small prints. Just a great quilt. Now, superstitions and stories like this may have gotten them to thinking other quilts could talk for them. Well, most of the slaves couldn't read or write, and their masters didn't like them talking to each other. Maybe quilts could help them escape from bondage to freedom. Well, to me, that's a logical assumption. Now, perhaps they had a secret meeting in their cabin, and they would turn the pot over at the door to catch the sounds of their secret meeting. There, they devised a quilt code made up of 10 quilts. They would put one quilt on the fence at a time, and then each quilt would mean something. The quilt would stay on the fence until all the planning to escape had been completed. Now, ancestors of runaways were forbidden to talk about this. So let's face it, much of this is hearsay. It's just passed on stories. It's oral family history. Some of the information I'm going to share with you today came from this woman. This is Mrs. Ozella McDaniel Williams, and she was from Charleston, South Carolina. She was told this oral family history by her mother and her grandmother. Authors Jacqueline Tobin and Raymond DeBard published the oral family history in Hidden in Plain View, The Secret Story of Quilts and the Underground Railroad. Now, Ozella Williams passed on just before this book was published by Doubleday in 1999. So this is Ozella's story, her oral family history.
Let my people go, oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go down.
Ozella said the monkey wrench quilt was the first quilt displayed as a signal for anyone who planned to escape. Oh, and this monkey wrench is just a beauty with its black mourning prints, then its wonderful reds and blues. The blocks are set on point with butterscotch. It was just a great yellow and orange fabric. Now, you can make your own monkey wrench block. This is what it looks like. All you have to do is start out with a background and a dark. Take 2 pieces of fabric, take a rectangle, 6 inches by 12 inches of each of the fabrics, put them right sides together, draw a 6-inch line, then draw diagonal lines and sew on both sides. Then all you need to do is just cut them apart. You've got your 4 corners right here, and square these up to 5.5 inches. Let's take a look. So there's one more unit then. We've got to get this striped piece right here. Comes from strips. This is the easiest part. 3-inch strips, sew them together, cut into 3-inch sections, and then all you need to do to finish it is just put a 3-inch square right in the middle. Well, the monkey wrench is a heavy metal tool that's used by the blacksmith, and this quilt is symbolized it's time to collect the tools needed for the journey north. Now, there were physical tools. There was tools for constructing a shelter, tools for defending themselves as a knife, tools for determining direction as a compass. Oh, and you've got to have some food. Oh, good loaf of bread. You got to have a few coins and put them all together in a bundle. So the monkey wrench quilt begins our adventure of oral family history.
In Egypt's land, tell, O Pharaoh, let my people go.
The wagon wheel is the second pattern in the secret quilt code. Well, wagons were the primary source of transporting runaways. Plus, they have all kinds of secret compartments. They could hide all kinds of things. And even if they weren't traveling by wagon, they were to pack as if they were. They were to remember all of the provisions they needed for survival. Now, another secondary pattern to the wagon wheel is this one. This is called carpenter's wheel. To the slaves, the master carpenter was Jesus. And so they sang the song about the chariot. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. If you get there before I do, you tell my friends I'm coming too. It's just a wonderful song. And this one is also a variation of the wagon wheel called the setting sun. If you can just imagine the sun setting right behind the Appalachian Mountains as the runaways were on their way to Cleveland. Perfect. Well, sunbonnets were an indicator of social status, and a woman that was in higher social status than a slave would wear a sunbonnet. And sunbonnets make great disguises. Oh, you could just pull it forward and kind of look down to the ground very shyly, and it would be a great disguise. Well, the story goes that there was a preacher who lived in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and every day he would ride into town and he would have 2 ladies sitting on the seat beside him wearing sunbonnets. A half an hour later, he would return, 2 ladies sitting beside him in sunbonnets, but nobody would even notice that the ladies had dark complexions. It's a great story. So let's just continue our road to freedom.
Lord, I want to cross over into camp.
The bear's paw quilt was the third quilt displayed. Slaves were to follow the trail of the bear because their footprints would indicate the best path to food and water. Well, that's good advice. especially if you want to eat. Well, most escapes took place in the spring when bears were roaming about after their long winter hibernation. Well, the color of this bear's paw quilt is turkey red, and it was made from madder root. Now, the color is still as vibrant as the day it was made. Montgomery Ward sold premium turkey red for 27.5 cents, or you could buy a synthetic red for just 9.5 cents. Well, I believe these brown stripes were red at one time, so using quality fabric was important even in the 1860s. The bear's paw block is easy to make. It has 16 claws in it. These are the paws. Now, the claws come from 2 pieces of fabric. They're medium and background, and this piece is 6 inches by 12 inches. All you need to do is draw on a 3-inch grid, draw your diagonal lines and sew on both sides of the grid, and then when you cut them apart, square the claws up to 2 1/4 inches. Now, the paws are 4-inch squares. So with the paws and the claws, you just set them together with a lattice and a square right in the center. Oh, it's just so much fun to do. Now, this new quilt is called Bear Valley. It reminds me of the bears traveling the Appalachian mountain range, and it is just a perfect wall hanging for a country home. Now, this road map, boy, I'd have a hard time following this road map, but this road map shows the Underground Railroad route through the mountains close to the South Carolina area that ran southwest to northeast. Well, we're on that trail and jogging west.
Still away to Jesus.
Once they made it through the mountains, they were to travel to the crossroads. Now, Cleveland, Ohio was the main crossroads, or the major terminal into Canada. Each station had a name, and Cleveland was known as Hope. Well, when they were delivered, the men were called hardware, and the ladies were called dry goods. Well, once they reached Cleveland, their lives changed drastically. The Crossroads was the 4th quilt displayed, and this one is a beauty. Now, it has circular quilting in the stitches. The ladies sat at the quilting frame and made an arc with their hand quilting. Now, this pattern is easy to do. It's just like a 9 patch. Now, you just start with 2.5-inch strips. Make 1 set with 2 backgrounds and 1 dark, and then cut them into 2.5-inch sections. You need to have 2 per block. And then make a second set with 2 dark and 1 background, only 1 section this time. Sew the blocks into a 9 patch and then measure them. And then you set them together with squares cut the same size and side and corner triangles, and you will have a crossroads quilt. Well, now you too can read that secret code of the first 4 blocks. Let's see. We'll see if you've been paying attention. The monkey wrench turns the wagon wheel toward Canada on a bear's paw trail to the crossroads. Well, they're at the crossroads now. They need to find a safe place.
He calls me by the thunder. The trumpet sounds within my soul.
The log cabin quilt is the 5th quilt in the secret code. Now, perhaps runaways were to look for a specific log cabin in Cleveland that was a safe house. Well, research did not uncover it, but after all, it was a long time ago, and this is oral family history. Or the quilt may have indicated to build a log cabin to weather out the winter. Well, that sounds cozy and safe to me. This is my favorite log cabin quilt. It's made from 1-inch wool strips, and the blocks are turned in different directions for a wonderful pattern. Now, I washed this quilt recently. It looks much better now. Well, on the plantations in the South, quilt washing day was fun for children. Well, first their mother filled the wash tub with water and soft soap, and then the children got right in the tubs with the quilts and they tromped the dirt out of them. What a day. Well, the log cabin block is always symbolized by center square. And then the logs in graduated lengths are laid down with light fabric on one half and logs in dark on the second half. And usually the center color was red to represent the warm glow or the cabin's hearth fire. Well, in this wonderful old quilt with 1 1/4 inch wide strips, the centers are red. This is a fields and furrows layout. And then other colors were also used as symbols. Gladys Marie Fry, in her book Stitched from the Soul, suggested a black center as a safe house, something like this. Well, it's unusual to see black in the middle of a log cabin block. This is a courthouse steps quilt. It's a pattern in the log cabin family, and all of the centers are red, but I want you to notice the one black center. Now, could this quilt hanging in front of a house represent a safe stopping place? It could be a true story. Well, then a yellow center indicated a light or a beacon in the wilderness. In Africa, the color yellow is used to signify life. It also represents a candle in the window. William Lloyd Still, now he was a famous black Underground Railroad conductor, lived in Philadelphia, and his family quilt is a log cabin quilt with a yellow center. Well, do you know how the Underground Railroad got its name? The story goes, there was a Kentucky slave that wanted to be free, and he made it to the shore of the Ohio River near John Rankin's safe house. Now, the slaveholder was right behind him. There was no boat for the slave in the icy water, so he just jumped right in. Then he heard a whippoorwill call. He looked up and saw a yellow light, the candle in the window at John Rankin's house. And you know, he vanished right before the slaveholder's eyes. When the slaveholder went home empty-handed, he told everyone an Underground Railroad came by and picked him up. Well, this is an unfinished log cabin quilt with just 3 fabrics in it. It's wool, just the red, the beige, the black, and it's the start of the barn raising pattern. But since it's not completed, we can just look at the back and examine how it was made. It was made on a base piece of fabric, and the quilt maker used scraps for the base, and this is how you do it. You start out with a piece of muslin or whatever, and you just draw an X right in the center, and the center square goes right in the middle of that X. Then the first light goes right sides to the center. You stitch right through the base and then fold it out. And then comes the next light. You put it right sides together to it, stitch right along there, and just fold it out. And you just keep alternating between light and dark to create the pattern. Oh, it's just one of my favorites. The log cabin pattern suggests order, simplicity, and union. Well, certainly the slaves had to unite, but it also evokes the spirit of Abraham Lincoln and his sense of liberty.
If you get there before I do, coming for to carry me home, tell all my friends I'm coming.
The shoe fly is the 6th quilt in our secret quilt code. Now, it may have been an actual person who aided escaping slaves, or a shoe fly might have even been a free black who aided and harbored fugitives. Well, Ozella Williams has little information on the shoe fly, but remember, this whole story is based on oral family history. Well, the fugitives often hid out in caves. They were known as cathedrals, and they also hid out in graveyards, especially if they were on the edge of the river or on the edge of town. Now, they might just crouch down low behind a tombstone, wait patiently for a signal from a lantern across the way to tell them it was safe to go on. In this book, Journey to Freedom, a story of the Underground Railroad, written by Courtney Wright, The shoe flies, or the station masters, are Mr. and Mrs. Anderson. Now, Mrs. Anderson hung a quilt out on her porch just so that the escaping fugitives would know that this was a safe haven for them. Mr. Anderson took them into the barn and he settled them down. He gave some hot stew and biscuits and some blankets. And just before they fell asleep, they talked about how much longer it would be until they reached freedom in Canada. Now, this is just a great book to read to children about the Underground Railroad. I really enjoy it. Now, the song, the Negro spiritual, Steal Away, is a directive for runaways to freedom, and these are the words: steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away, I ain't got long to stay here. My Lord calls me, he calls me by the thunder. That means you should leave in a rainstorm so the dogs don't catch the scent, and the rain washes away the footprints. Green trees are bending. That means leave in the summertime. Poor sinner stands a-trembling. Tombstones are bursting. Hide out in a graveyard. Poor sinner stands a-trembling. My Lord calls me, he calls me by the lightning. That means that the lightning will illuminate the landscape. They can see just where to go. It lights their path. The trumpet sounds within my soul. I ain't got long to stay here. It's a very touching song to listen to. Well, in this quilt, the shoe fly, I use reproduction fabrics. I could not find an antique shoe fly quilt, so we just made this one recently with reproduction fabrics, but each block is a different fabric. Oh, and it's great fun to do. And then the blocks are set together with a striped lattice throughout. Now, it's actually a piece square in the corners. It's a 9-patch with 4 piece squares in the corners, and whatever size the piece squares are, you also cut the center square and the 4 background squares exactly the same size. This is my technique. Well, I went a little bit larger. I used a 4.5-inch patch. This is background and medium placed right sides together, 2 sets of them. Draw a diagonal line, sew on both sides, so then when you cut it apart and square it up, square it to 4 inches. And then you just need to have a 4-inch center square, the 4-inch backgrounds to set the whole block together. Oh, it's just easy quilt to do. Well, may we praise all of the shoe flies along the way that got the runaways safely on their way to freedom. This is a good break point now, because the runaways are now safe from the plantation owners and the cruelty that went along with slavery. Well, I'm not meaning to pass over the inhumane treatment, but I want to focus on the quilts, because quilting bees were one of the times when the enslaved women were set free. Oh, it was a rare moment they had to themselves, when each woman could be an artist with her scissors and her cloth. Well, this scrap quilt is certainly a piece of art. It's a scrap bag quilt in the hands all around pattern, and all hands did have to work together to get the fugitives out of bondage. Well, I just bought it recently in Kentucky. Now, the block is very interesting. It's made of diamonds and squares with a complete 8-point star in the center, and then the stars are in each of the corners with only 8 diamonds each. The diamonds are hand-pieced. It's hard to believe. And it has very thick batting, so the quilter made long quilting stitches. Well, there's no border, and there's no separate binding. The backing is brought around to the front, and it's quite warm, very heavy. Well, warmth was important because slaves with mean masters were only given 1 quilt or none at all. You know, historians say if they got one, they would only get a new one every 3 years. Ozella said that her mother and her grandmother showed her how to quilt. Well, they would all sit underneath a large oak tree, and her parents would tell stories. They would hold up a particular quilt, and then they would instruct how to sew the pattern. Then they told how the particular pattern was placed in the story. Ozella was a good listener. You know, she was the only one in the family that paid attention. Well, we're over halfway through the Code of Quilts from the Underground Railroad, and we're fortunate that Ozella shared her oral family history with us.